Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lamont Weber, and today we have, I think, the beginning of an historic series, a re-examination with author and researcher Ole Dammegard. Welcome, Ole.
Thank you so much, Alfred. It's a pleasure as usual.
And this is a re-examination of the assassination of Swedish Prime Minister Olof, Palme,
Yep,
and I hope I got the pronunciation right. I'm not
you did indeed. You did
on
indeed.
top of my Swedish. Uh, and Ole, uh, why is this such an important revelation overall in terms of the deep state and its relations and this kind of almost false flag, you might say?
This case is totally unique. I tell you, I can guarantee your mind would be blown. It's mind blowing, absolutely incredible. It's so multi-layered and such a case of deception. And it's also the world's most expensive murder investigation ever. It's cost the Swedish taxpayers 2 billion Swedish kroner. And the official investigation have found out more or less nothing. After all of these years, it's 34 years, I believe, today, this year, and it's come up with absolutely nothing. It's like JFK. Was it Lee Harvey Oswald or was it not? That's where the official narrative had stopped with JFK, even though after so many years, so much of the real truth has come out there. And with the Swedish, this alleged assassination, it is the same. It's like we have a Swedish version of Lee Harvey Oswald, an absolute innocent patsy that they've tried for so many years to nail, and in the end he was killed just as Lee Harvey Oswald as well. And so the official narrative is a lone crazy guy or a lone drug addict who mistook the Swedish prime minister for his drug dealer, and because they had the same type of fur hat, and so he ran home, got hold of a gun, and went back while they were in the cinema. And then when they got out there, he was waiting without knowing where they were going. Even though he didn't know where they were going, he positioned himself perfectly for a hit. And then he officially killed the Swedish prime minister with one shot and wounded his wife with another, ran off and disappeared. And then he was sentenced for this. Then he was the higher court systems released him and declared him innocent. And ever since that, uh, this was in the late 80s, it has just been dragging out, and everybody has been pointing to the patsy, even though he's been freed in court. And then at the absolute end here, about 9 months ago, the Swedish investigation came out and said, well, no, we think we have him. And so very exciting, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they said, and then they said the option, either we're going to get a verdict for this killing, a valid verdict, or we're going to just close down the whole investigation after 34 years. And so it was so obvious for someone like myself. What they're trying to do is a psyop. What they want to do is they're going to pin it on someone dead and say, it's him, but unfortunately dead. So what can we do? At least we found him. And with that said, we can then close down the whole investigation with the flag in the top and end of story. But it's absolute BS, Alfred. It is absolute BS. And I really hope that I will be able to show you that this is a massive, massive, massive case. I've never come across anything like it. And I've spent some 30 years digging very deep into this whole thing. I also written a book that is called Coup d'etat in slow motion. You can find part 1 and 2 on my website, lightonconspiracies.com. And it's in English, Swedish, and German. So it's the only book that I know of that is more than Swedish. Maybe there's a single one in English in total, but all of these, most of these books are pointing to the Patsy, a big question mark around the Patsy, where I say I've named every single person more or less involved. We named pictures, how they did it, how the whole thing was carried out, and this has only been met by absolute silence and tinfoil hat sort of pointing fingers and this whole thing. But anyway, let's see what how you find this presentation.
Right. I'm looking forward to it. And so without further ado, take us on this journey.
The thing, Alfred, is that this is an enormous case. So this is also why I have avoided this one, even though when I'm on tour, I've been doing presentations about this case. But normally I take like 2-3 hours just to show, first of all the incredible weird things that has happened in the investigation. Bizarre stuff. I mean, thousands of questions marks where you're just like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Like this. So first I do that for an hour or so to just show you the base structure of this whole thing. And up until the middle of this presentation, it would be like you're sitting, this is just mad, this is just mad. And then after that, I will say now, when you might have some confidence in me and the level of research I've done into this case, I'm going to tell you what I believe is the real truth. And that is where it's like, hold your hat, because it just goes absolutely wild. I want to say that there are many researchers in Sweden that so totally disagree with me, but I can only say that I spent more time than most it's all of these years. And also the difference between me and most of the other ones is that I've been looking on an international basis into so many different assassinations, and thus been able to learn a much wider or get a wider understanding of how these operations are carried out, and even the connections they have with other major assassinations, such as JFK, John Lennon, Robert Smith in South America, many of these different cases that are where there are key people in this mystery as well that keeps appearing in the other ones. So, well, what can I say? I hope you have the patience to come with me on this trip of nostalgia, or whatever you want to call it. And so I prepared a PowerPoint presentation, because you have to see it for yourself, especially if you haven't been on location. And I normally, when I go to Sweden, I go on the site of this murder, and I bring private groups, people that are interested on donation. I take them for a 5 to 7 hour walk around this location, just like had it been in Dealey Plaza, but just showing what did the witnesses actually see, who was driving these cars, and so on. And so I expose the whole case, and it will also be connected into the alleged sinking of MS Estonia, the blowing up of MS Estonia, which killed almost 1,000 people. And there are other cases as well, where I will just show the links into Freemasonic rituals and stuff. So it's one crazy case.
Excellent. Well, we're looking forward, and off we go.
So we do like this, and boom. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, everything is fine.
Okay, let me just sorry about the technique. Well, there's my book, by the way, in the middle, in both in English and in Swedish and German as well. So, and it's almost 1,000 pages. The reason why there's part 1 and 2 is just because it would be too thick to hold in your hand. So I thought I'll just chop it in the middle and make 2 parts of it. So it's, if you are interested in buying it from Amazon or Light on Conspiracy, and so you need both parts. Otherwise, it doesn't really make any sense. So I want to start with, you know, like, I am one of the few people that are stopped in Sweden. You know, they really try to censor me in Sweden when I go on tour. And I think, you know, Sweden is supposed to be an open country, you know, with very open-minded, liberal ways of looking upon it. There's no censorship, there's no anything officially. And I mean, they even invite people like Marina Abramovich, who's infamous for spirit cooking with connections into Pizzagate with all kinds of bizarre stuff. She is welcome, and it's called Art. This is from some of the parties where some celebrity parties. I think this is in New York and so on, where they make a cake that looks identical to a human body. They cut out the heart, they chop off the head. I mean, these things are bizarre. And then that person is allowed, and I'm shut down. I think really that should tell you something, that there's something bizarre going on. And also, I mean, I want to Prague Peace Prime. I'm a one-man band, and this image to the left here is when I started doing radio shows. I had, we call it Studio One, that was a toilet, where I had the computer on the toilet, a chair in front, and then just a carpet over the head, a blanket on the cover literally, and to avoid the echo. But it's sort of like, I'm just a one-man band, so what is the problem? Why are they so scared of me, and why do they shut me down? And it's the same with the different types of presentations I've done. I mean, I was on tour 2 years ago, and we were going to a city called Karlstad. I mean, the thing is, I don't draw 100,000 people. I draw like maybe 100 or 150 people, you know. So why should it even be a problem for these so-called so very powerful forces? And here we were on our way to Karlstad, and suddenly I heard on the radio that this controversial speaker had been stopped. And I was like, who is that? And it turned out it was me. So I was the controversial speaker that they tried to stop. So anyway, we and TV4 also right as soon as some of these terror attacks happen, they go out, they talk about fake news, and they specifically mention me by name over and over again to just shut me down. So what's going on? What is going on? And so I welcome to you to the Olof Palme murder mystery, the world's biggest murder mystery. It really is. And here is myself with his name was Gösta Söderström. He was the first police on location when Palme was shot. And we're going to come back to that because he stepped right into a major big operation without knowing it, and was a very, very honest and decent man. So he stood up and stood by his version, and they tried to destroy him. They did everything to destroy him, his reputation, his career, everything. And it ended up with him dying. He was found dead in his home alone. And you know, this is the thing, when you stand up against this death machine, it has consequences. Now, the very first chief or head of the investigation, his name was Hans Holmér. He was the former chief of Säpo, which is the Swedish version of a combination of FBI and CIA, the secret police. And he said, and I'm going to come back to him over and over again, he mentioned very early that if the real truth will ever be revealed, it will shake Sweden in its foundations. So if the real truth, what can shake a nation in its foundation? It has to be something big. It has to be something much bigger than just a patsy, you know, a lone crazy guy or a right extremist or a Russian. Even if a CIA operative had killed him, what would justify such a statement here? And so there was a lot of people also that were saying similar things in the inner circle, saying the best thing is that nobody ever finds out. How can you say stuff like that if you don't know what the real truth is? How could this guy say it will shake Sweden in its foundation if he didn't know what the real truth was? And this was just a month or so after the assassination on February the 28th, 1986. So I wanted to start with the official version just for you to get a better understanding of what is said to have happened. So February the 28th, is or was the last weekday of the Swedish national winter holidays. It was a Friday evening, and it was pretty cold. No, not super cold, but a little windy and a little cold. And it's said that Olof Palme and his wife went to the cinema this evening. Normally he had a bodyguard many times, but this evening they decided, they say in the afternoon, that they wanted to go to the cinema, which was located in central Stockholm. It's a cinema called Grand, and they wanted to meet up with their son Morten. It was Olof Palme, the Swedish Prime Minister, his wife Lisbeth, and they wanted to meet up with his son, or their son Morten, and his girlfriend. So they left there. They were living in an apartment in the old city of Stockholm, and so they walked without bodyguards. They had given, Olof Palme had given them some time off and said, no, don't worry about it, I'll be fine. So there were no bodyguards and no nothing. And on the way, when they walked towards the subway, there were people observing walkie-talkie men around them. They took the subway into the center of Stockholm, and then they went to this. You can see here are observations of walkie-talkie men around where they lived, and then the dotted line is where they walked to the subway station, and you can see yet again there's quite a few observations of walkie-talkie men. I'm not saying that there was 8 different walkie-talkie men. I'm saying 8 observations of walkie-talkie men on this way. So they went to this Grand Cinema, which is an interesting cinema because it's right in the center of Stockholm. It's by a street called Sveavägen, and it's right opposite the Social Democrat headquarters, which is right on the other side of the street. And you had the ABF house, which is also the Social Democrats sort of like conference building right next to this cinema as well. So it's in the heart of the Social Democratic Party in the center of Stockholm. And so they went to see this film. It was a Swedish film. And once they'd finished, they left the building, and then they were like, what are we going to do? Are we going to walk home or take the subway home, or what are we going to do? So anyway, they decided to walk home. And so they walked south towards the old city of Stockholm. They went and changed the side of the street. And then they passed a big building called the Skandia. It's an insurance company, the Skandia building. And around the corner, it's a corner with sort of like an edge. Behind that corner, there was a guy standing in dark clothes with a gun under. He had a revolver in one of his hands, and he was standing like this with arms crossed, just waiting for them to appear. So he did not see them walking towards him. He was around the corner, but he was standing there waiting for them to appear. And then when they passed him, he stepped out behind them, fired one shot straight into the back of Olof Palme. This is officially a Smith & Wesson 347 Magnum, 357, sorry, Magnum, and with it was a special kind of ammo that can metal piercing that goes straight through any kind of body armor. And so he was killed, but they were walking like with arms, arm in arm, or whatever you call it, he and his wife. And so when he was shot, he started falling forward, and that pulled her with him down. So she almost went down on her knee, and at the same time as he fell down and she was sort of twisted to the side, the gunman fired another shot at her. And officially, they say that this bullet touched her back. It went in through her fur coat and touched the shoulder blades of her, and then came out on the other side. And so the shooter was standing for a few seconds just looking at them, just checking, is he dead, and so on. And then he turned around and he ran up some stairs that have been now called, they're infamous for this whole thing. It's a very, it looks they're quite unique, this stairs here. And so the gunman ran away, and he ran up on the left side of these stairs, and then all the way up to the top of this stairs. I think it's about 90 odd steps up, you know. And what people were seeing was that he looked very fit. He was fast moving. He was running up these stairs very easily. He looked over his shoulder, and boom, he disappeared. And that is the last thing that anyone knows about this whole thing officially. That's where he disappeared. So here, if you look at the map, you got Sveavägen. That's one of the big street that goes through the center of Stockholm. And at the X, that's where he was shot. The arrow shows the way that the shooter took off. He ran up the stairs, and then where the line get dotted, that's where they say the last observation of the shooter was made by people that was coming walking. But and he just disappeared into emptiness. No one knows what happened to him. And this is the street where he was last seen, on the right-hand side of this street, while he was running down, and he was fiddling around with something that looked like a bag for a gun. No, so this is sort of the official scenario of what happened. Now let's look at some of the things that doesn't match up. Because you have, if something happens the way it's said, there should be a natural flow. There also, you should see that when something like this happened, there should be a natural way of, you know, the police response, ambulances, all of these things. But like Fletcher Prouty, if you remember who he was, he used to work for the Pentagon, and he is the character called Mr. X in the JFK movie. And one of the things he said about top political assassinations when they are staged is, he said, you can see that it is black up, not for what is happening, but all the things that don't happen. That's one of the the giveaways of that this could be an operation. So he said, always look for what doesn't match up, what doesn't happen, and so on, all the unnatural things. So here, some of the things, let's get going. Okay, so he was officially shot at the 23 p.m. a Friday afternoon, no, Friday evening in central Stockholm. And so what happened was that no one knew in Sweden for hours and hours, and it was people abroad that they knew about this assassination before the Swedish news went out with it. Also, the alarm that was sent out was delayed for hours, So you have the first one that went out. The wife of Olof Palme said that there were 2 people involved in the shooting when she was heard at the hospital, when she was questioned there. And so the first alarm that went out was almost 2 hours after the alleged shooting. Oh, it was more. It was, I believe it was 2:05 in the morning that the first alarm went out. He was shot 11:21 p.m. I'm sorry, Alfred, I'm a little tired today. But anyway, so it took all the way up until 2 o'clock before the first alarm that sent, and this was only sent out to very key vehicles and key people in around central Stockholm. Nothing in the rest of Stockholm, nothing in the rest of Sweden. I mean, no one sort of blocked the streets. There were nothing. It was dead. People that were walking around the street, nobody knew. No, there was no sirens, there was no nothing. And so the second alarm that went out was 6 minutes past 5 a.m. And there suddenly they had changed it from 2 shooters or 2 people involved to 1 person with a different description. First alarm, 2 men. Second alarm, 1 man. And the description that was sent out was of one of the witnesses. This is a guy called Anders Björkman, who was on his way home that evening, and he just happened to walk more or less right behind the prime minister, the couple, without really knowing who they were. And then he saw somebody right behind him fire a shot right into the back. So he freaked out and jumped into the entrance of the building on his left. And so he was right there, just a few meters from where this happened. And so people, when they described the assassin or the murderer, they described his dress, his cap, his jacket, the colors he had on him. So from the very first minute, they were looking for the wrong person. And so when people started hearing about it the very next morning, they started calling in, because this was such a traumatic shock for Sweden. I mean, up at that, to that point, there had been no political assassinations, at least not since 1733, when a Swedish king was killed. But nothing. Sweden up until that point was famous around the world for being so peaceful, so quiet, you know, that the prime minister could take his bicycle to and from his to work. And it was part of the Swedish image, you know, international image. So when this happened, people were shocked, just like with the JFK assassination. It doesn't matter who you ask in Sweden about where he or she was when Palme was murdered, they will all know it. It's just like with JFK. So there was this woman here, Anna-Britt, she's then just a few minutes before Palme was shot, she saw on a parallel street, there were 3 people coming running, very fit people, coming running down with what looked like walkie-talkies in their hands, running parallel with where the couple was walking down the street towards the shooter. So she called in and said, I just want to let you know, at the exact time when this said to have happened, I observed these 3 people. I even think that I can recognize one of them. So the police that received the call said, so what did they look like? And she said, well, one of them was blonde. And then the police officer said, well, thank you so much, but we're not looking for blonde people. And then he put down the receiver, and she was never heard again. On the way to the subway, they were stalked. You know, there were all of these walkie-talkie observations. And around the site where he was killed, where they lived, the way they went into the center of the city, there have been somewhere between 50 and 200 observations of people with walkie-talkies, the days upcoming to this thing, and then at the time around this assassination. All of them, I say all of them, has been disregarded. The investigation has said, well, you have bad eyesight, you remember it was the wrong date, no, sorry, that cannot be true, you must have mistaken. 200 observations of walkie-talkies. And this was before the cell phones, you know, so these were like big military type things. And no one, instead, the witnesses that have insisted have been harassed by the police and threatened. And so it's the exact opposite, and very similar to JFK when it comes to the way that witnesses and so have been treated. So here, if you look at it says Grand, that is where the cinema is, and X is where he was shot. And then you can see around this whole thing, when he was in the cinema, you can see all the observations on walkie-talkies where they were located. And then the picture to the, or the map to the right, is when they started walking towards the X where he was shot, you will see the observations of walkie-talkies surrounding the whole place. And the chief of investigation, the second one, was interviewed one day, and they asked him about this. How come you have not looked into these things? And he said, but why do you think they have to do with the assassination? His words, he said, why were there no observations of walkie-talkies out in the suburbs? I mean, what? The suburbs, of course, it would be around the victim that is under surveillance, but that is the level of IQ or the level of answers that have been given to us. So also right away, the more I started digging into this thing, I started finding, together with other people as well, a lot of different documents that had been manipulated. For instance, here is the police report of the number of cars when they came, uh, you know. So the assassination was 23:21. That's 11 p.m. 21 minutes. And here it says that after 2 minutes, there were 14 police cars on location. And then they go through the whole thing about what happened. But that is absolutely not what any witnesses saw. Absolutely not. And they even managed to write the wrong day. It says lördag, which means Saturday, when it was actually a Friday. And they also managed to get the number wrong for the time and the date on the one that they printed out. Right away, this is Hans Holmér, the guy who said they would shake Sweden in its foundations. This is the first murder investigator, the chief, the head of the investigation. And this guy was a former chief of the secret police. He had never led a murder investigation ever. He was what is called länspolismästare, which is like the police chief in central Stockholm, but he had no experience of murder investigation. And even though that is the case, he just came in at about 12 hours after the assassination and just took over. He just took over the whole thing. No one was asked, should we do it with him, should we take the very best people to the, he just took over and everybody accepted it. And very early on, he pointed out, this is the gun that killed Olof Palme, the type of gun. And he showed on a press conference, it's a very famous picture here, he's holding up two Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum, saying this is the murder weapon. We're looking for a Magnum 357 Smith & Wesson. But there is a problem here because the type of bullet that was found, that could have been shot by 8 different weapon models, you know, not just Smith & Wesson, Taurus and many other. It's the exact same caliber. It's all of the descriptions that from the bullet would fit on 8 different types of guns. But here they locked into Smith & Wesson 357 without being able to explain how. And there were like gun dealers in Stockholm. There's not that many, and they were like, we don't get it. We don't understand. How can he say a thing like that? But right away, boom, they locked it in like that. Okay, so we have these 2 bullets that was found, and they were found, both of them, in pretty mysterious ways. You can see here is the site of the murder. You can see the blood on the pavement. And to the left is the road where the killer is said to have taken off towards the stairs. So where did they find the bullets? We have, this is where Olof Palme was shot. You can see we're looking from the point of view where the killer ran off, and the couple were walking from right to left here on their way home. So this thing that is in the pavement, that's the only sign. There's no statues, there's no memorial things, there's no parks, there's nothing that is named after Olof Palme. Just this little brass plate in the pavement saying this is the place where Olof Palme was murdered. Nothing else than that. So a 357 at that time was one of the world's most powerful handguns. It is extremely powerful. And I can't remember the speed of the exit, the velocity of the bullet, but it's incredibly high. And so this is where he was shot. Now, the first bullet that was found, there were 2 bullets that were found. One that is said to have been fired after his wife, and then one that passed straight through the body of Olof Palme. So where were they found? Because when you see the angle that the shooter was aiming at when he fired these 2 shots, they should have continued going parallel with this street, maybe for a mile or 2 miles, you know, a long way, especially the one that missed the wife, you know. So where were they found? Well, the first one that is said to have killed Olof Palme, that was actually the second one that was found, was found 37 hours after the assassination, right behind this concrete pillar. Behind it. How, how can a bullet go through the body of someone and then do like a U-turn around and then land more or less in pristine condition behind a concrete big pillar? The second bullet that was fired after towards his wife, Lisbeth, was logically, it would have gone parallel with the street south, and who knows where it would have ended up. But instead, it was found on top of a little hill, you know, like a little snowy hill, where actually inside a paper wastebasket, that was where the bullet was found. Totally the wrong angle, on top of the snow, inside a waste pad, so, like this. And so who found it? Well, it was an Indian freelance journalist. His name was Alfredo de Tavares. And he sat at home. Let me see. Yeah. He sat himself. This is the guy who was a journalist, but had some connection with Indian intelligence. It's come forward. I do not know the connections here. But anyway, he said that he was sitting at home. He heard about the assassination. He thought, oh my God, I need to help them. I need to help them. So he went in early in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. He went in there. That's like 6.5 hours after the assassination. And so he put himself, I kid you not, in trance. He self-hypnosis, saying, where is the bullet? Where is the bullet? And so he was walking around, and then he opened his eyes, and guess what? There was the bullet. So he picked it out of this paper waste basket, or whatever you call it, picked it up and said, oh my God, could this be the one? And he handed it over to the police. Now, these two bullets, they've never been able to prove that these two bullets even have come from the same weapon, even though there's a lot of you know, forensic evidence that shows that they're possibly not even from the correct one. And now, after all of these years, now police officers are stepping forward, police that were involved in this whole investigation, saying it was not the real bullets. They were not the real. They were placed on location as red herrings to point away from it. Now, why and how could they end up behind the pillar? I tell you, this is my theory, but if you want to place out a bullet, if you look here, this is the hours after the assassination. You can see there's a whole crowd standing there, and the police just, you know, cut off a very tiny little area, very, very small little area. I mean, come on, it's only the Prime Minister of Sweden that had been murdered. So we'll just take a few square yards here and there and so on, just turn. So people were walking across this murder site, in and out and whatever. They did a little forensic investigation on site. They collected the snow. They went around with brushes and everything. The only thing they found was half a button from his shirt. Otherwise, nothing. And then 37 hours or 34 hours later, they found the bullet in the area that they had already cleaned and done a very thorough forensic investigation on. They found the bullet behind that pillar. So why behind the pillar? And I think that what happened was that after the assassination, somebody was placing out evidence, trying to point away or point in a certain direction, put out red herrings. And the only place, because there were all the time, there were hundreds of people on location there, trying to get a look at the murder site and put down roses and whatever. The only place that nobody would see if somebody went down on his knees and then happened to just put place a projectile down there on the ground, the only place that nobody was already standing so they could see the site was behind the pillar, because you can't see anything behind that. So I think somebody came there on 34 hours after the assassination, went down on his knees, pretending that he was fixing his shoes, placed the bullet there. That's how it ended up there, because there's absolutely no logical explanation. So after this assassination happened, the first chief of investigation, Hans Holmér, he said right away, we need to get some jet fighters with cameras up and take photos, film all the rooftops of Stockholm to see if he's thrown up the gun there. That was the official story. If he had taken the revolver and just managed to throw it up there. But we're looking at buildings that are like, I don't know, 10, 15 stories high. I don't know anyone that would be able to throw up a gun like that. But anyway, he ordered these two jet fighters to fly and film the whole of Stockholm, or the area there. But unfortunately, it turned out that they had forgotten to put film in the camera. So these on both planes. So these films officially do not exist. I would say, if you do something that important, and then you come back home, you land, and you find out, oh my God, we forgot to load the cameras with film. Wouldn't it be an idea to maybe load the cameras with film and fly again? Am I naive, Alfred, or don't you think that that would be sort of like a good idea?
Well, it seems like there are two false flag methodologies going here. Number one, misdirection, official misdirection in answering questions. And number two, gaslighting, like not putting in the film is like gaslighting, i.e. they create this absurd situation. It's just to like get people off track. It's called gaslighting.
Yeah, I tell you that we're going to come into many different layers here along the way. So also another thing that was very strange is that officially there were two ambulances that came and picked up the prime minister, and also it said that the wife of the prime minister was also put into one of the ambulances. But no one has seen two ambulances. It's only on the paper that there were two ambulances. No one on location saw more than one. And it's very, very strange, because also on the way to the hospital, when they had picked up the body of Olof Palme, I mean, they were driving very fast to the hospital, and unfortunately they were delayed because they couldn't find their way. They had forgotten how they got to get to this hospital. It's only the biggest hospital in Stockholm, and it's somewhere they drive like multiple times per day. But this day, unfortunately, they forgot. So they came like 5-6 minutes later than they should have arrived. And when they arrived, the timing didn't fit, the timestamp and so on didn't fit on the official papers. So someone afterwards started manipulating these numbers to make it fit better. And this is something we will see all the time. There was one of the things, like all the recordings, radio recordings of the radio communication between ambulances, police cars, and so on. These are in those days, there were like a voice that was saying the time. So it would be like 11 p.m., 40 and 10, beep. 11 for blah, 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 and 50, beep. These type of recording. And here we have that the evidence that has later been put forward with the recordings and so on has been totally manipulated. It's like there are big parts missing, and it's in the wrong order. And even a friend of mine discovered that at that night they had, or at that time in Stockholm, they had two recordings of the time of this voice, 20:53 and 10, beep. And one of them was sort of like a standby machine, only in case the main one had a problem or something. And on the extra one, the backup one, there was a slight little click sound every time they said, and 10, beep, a tiny little click sound. but that was only on the backup version, not on the original thing. And so when he analyzed these tape recordings of the radio communication this evening, he found that some of it was with the click sound and some of it wasn't with the click sound, meaning somebody has manipulated the recordings. Why on earth would anyone do something like this? And could a normal, like a patsy type of person or a drunk or whatever who was later blamed for the assassination, had he access to this type of material? Would he have access to go in and manipulate it? Would he be able to get into the safes and play around with these things? Could he fix the documents, the protocols? Could he do that? Or are we looking at something totally different? And then, just like with RFK and JFK and MLK and stuff, the recordings or the evidence, well, it took up too much space. So they burnt them. It's only the biggest murder case in the world, at least the most expensive one. So they thought, wow, why should we keep these type of things? So they burnt the tape recordings. That later appeared again in a safe. There was a police chief in his safe. Suddenly these recordings were found again. So people were like, oh my God, they're here. And then they disappeared once again. So bad luck. You know, it's just like with JFK, where they say that they threw out pieces of his brains and also the different types of evidence regarding the autopsy because there was not space enough in the FBI big archives. Wake me up. Anyway, so let's have a look at the patsies. The first one that they tried to blame it on was he was called a 33-year-old. His real name was Victor Gunnarsson. And this is a very strange individual. There's a lot of people that thinks that he was working for the CIA, that he had some very strange connections into different intelligence areas and so on. And he was the first one that was arrested. They tried to nail him for it, but after a while he was released, and he couldn't live in Sweden anymore because everybody recognized him. So he moved to the US, and in the US he was found murdered with 2 shots in the head, naked out in the forest, and then 2 shots in the head. I think one of them in the mouth, which is one of the mob's way of, you know, saying snitch. So we also had that when he was found dead, the second in chief of the heads of investigation just happened to be he had just flown over to the FBI to go through some profiling with them. So he was there, and this guy was found not so far away from where this guy was, but dead and executed. So right away when this had happened, there was a woman the night of the murder who she was an artist, and one of the things that she used to do was when, you know, if she had been out dancing and so on, when she came home in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep, she sat and drew pictures of people that she had met that night just for fun, like a hobby. And so she had seen some 25 minutes after the assassination on a narrow little street, not quite a bit from where he was shot. She met this guy around 30, 35, you know, pretty thin guy that was just walking and avoiding to look at her. So she thought, who knows, maybe this guy had something to do with it. So she had already made a drawing when in the middle of the night before she even knew about the murder. So she tried to contact the police or the investigation saying, I might have seen him, but the police was so not interested. They didn't want to meet her. They didn't want to see a drawing. And so she contacted a friend of hers that was working for national radio. And through that radio host, they contacted the investigation, and the investigation said, okay, we'll meet her. So they took her drawing, and then they sent for some experts from West Germany. It's Wiesbaden, which is one of the centers also where the CIA have a big operation. And so these experts came with a special sort of like a like a photo. I don't even know what to say, what to call it, but it's like a photo tool where they could put together sort of like, okay, he had brown eyes, then they could exchange the brown eyes. He had a wide mouth. They could change the mouth to a smaller, wider, the ears, the color of the hair, and then put together the different ingredients of that face, and then in the end they could print out something that actually looked a bit like a photo. So from her drawing, this photo came out, and this photo was broadcasted all over the world, saying this is what the killer looked like, even though no one had seen him. No one had seen him. And her drawing was of a white man, Caucasian guy, but the picture that they made with this photo tool was somebody that looked Middle Eastern. He looks like a Muslim terrorist. And she said that's not what he looked like, but nobody was listening to her. So after the first one, when they failed to nail the 33-year-old, the next one was they tried to nail the Kurdish leader and party called PKK, which was a liberation movement in Kurdistan, which is the Kurdish people have been struggling for a long, long time to just try and have somewhere. They're like the native Indians in the US. They're like, I think they're where they used to have a country that's divided in 3 or 4 different nations, like Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. There's some other areas also. I think it's 4 different nations where their territory is sort of split up by these others. So they've all actually been banned, and through Sweden, they managed to get a terrorist label on this organization. So they blame PKK for being behind this assassination. But Olof Palme was more or less the only international politician that was supporting PKK in their fight for liberation. So why on earth would they murder him? It doesn't make any sense at all. So after a few years, they finally decided for the perfect killer, the perfect patsy. And his name is not Lee Harvey Oswald, it's Christer Pettersson. And this guy is perfect. He looked strange, he said weird things, he had a violent background, he had killed somebody more or less very close to the site of this assassination. He had stabbed a guy with a bayonet, and he was just perfect. The only problem was that he had a perfect alibi, that he had been observed in a subway station at the time of the shooting, way north of Stockholm, by a vicar, but that didn't count. This man of the church was not believed, and instead we were told, here is the killer. So this is the guy that they really tried to nail for the whole thing. So I'm going to go into a lot more detail. I'm just pointing out weird things here. So we have the wife's strange behavior. And here is my book here, Coup d'etat in slow motion, or Statskupp in slow motion. On Amazon, you can find it. So this police officer went to the hospital right after the shooting, and he was the only one that spoke to Elizabeth. There were 2 police officers, but they were the only ones speaking to her at this. And that's when she said there were 2 people. She said, I did not see what he looked like, but there were 2 of them. And also she while they were there, she also said, by the way, I have been shot as well. And everybody was like, what do you mean? Nobody knew that she had any kind of injury. She refused to let the doctor have a look at it. There was one doctor that was a relative of her. I think it was her brother-in-law that just happened to work there that night. He had a look. And they described this wound as, there was one person that said it looked like that she had been whipped once, just a red mark. And the other one said it was a deep, like, canal, which sounds pretty deep to me. But she had no treatment, there was nothing. And then when they did the reconstruction of this whole crime some days after the murder, there was a reconstruction that was totally built on her observations, but they did the reconstruction without her. Have you heard such a bizarre thing? So the reason why they have the reconstruction, everybody else is there except her. And then also it's like she said, I didn't see anything. I don't remember anything. I don't have no idea what he looked like. Then the chief of police, Hans Holmér, the chief of the investigation, and the chief for the homicide squad, the national homicide squad, the guy down to the left, they went home to see her, and they had a meeting for an hour and a half or two while they were talking to her. And when they left again, they brought with them a perfect description of his face, his facial structure, his eyes, everything. And you cannot do things like that. It's like you cannot guide a witness. I mean, you know that from court cases. So, and especially that if you see something, your memory will always become less and less. It's not that you start remembering more and more, maybe through hypnosis sometimes, but normally the memory goes down. And here we have the exact opposite of the natural thing. Suddenly she remembered this and this and this and this. And this is then the image that we have been fed with. This is what he looked like. So after the assassination, one of these ambulances picked up the body of Olof Palme, and Lisbeth, his wife, is officially said to have jumped into the ambulance. They then drove to the hospital, where Lisbeth Palme arrives much later and in a police car. There was this freelance journalist that was standing outside the hospital, and he took this photo of her when she arrived to the hospital. You can see she's running into the hospital. So what happened there? She left in an ambulance, and somehow she got into the police car on the way. We're talking about like a 5-minute drive maximum. So what happened there? And if you see here to the left, you see the jacket that she had on him officially when she was shot. But the jacket to the right is the one that has been put forward as evidence with bullet holes in it. But if you look at it, it's different. There's no belt in the waist, and there's no hoodie on it. So it's not the same jacket. It's not the same fur coat. Can you see? And then the investigation made this incredibly bad confrontation, like with a video, where they wanted her to come and identify the shooter. This is like a couple of years after the assassination. So what they did was that the DA and a police officer, they spoke to her before and informed her, we now have a person that we suspect for it. He's an alcoholic. He's sort of like a dropout. And well, he's, I think also they said the age that he's around 40, 45. Anyway, so when the lineup was put in front of her, it was a video lineup. And the first thing she says is, well, it's easy to see who's the alcoholic. He's also got a stripy jumper on. All the rest are police officers, most of them quite fit. And then you have this guy. So he's also, if you look, everybody else has black shoes. He's got different color shoes. So this video confrontation are now being used internationally as an example of how not to perform an identification like this, because she pointed him out, saying he is the guy. And this has been used over and over again. Why would she do something if she didn't recognize him? But she pointed this guy out. And it's very strange with his son as well. We're going to come back to this. This is his son, Morten, that were with the couple at the cinema this evening. And afterwards, between the time of Olof Palme being taken to the hospital and then to the early morning, the early hours of the morning, he made a lot of weird stuff that we're going to look into more. But also he said he was not allowed to be taking part of this reconstruction as well. And one of the things, he pointed this guy out as well, because he remembered that he, at the time of the killing, had white shoes on, the guy that he believed was the killer. And so when he saw that this guy had light colored shoes, he said, ah, I recognize the shoes. So I'm asking you, a couple of years after, do you think, is it possible that he could have another pair of shoes on, and that is not something that can identify a killer? But this is what has been used in the court case. So once they started really with a trial where they were trying to nail this Patsy, Lisbeth, the wife, started having all kinds of bizarre requirements. She did not allow that there was any recordings. She did not allow, she didn't want to be interviewed. She didn't want anyone to see her wounds. She didn't want the press to be in the courtroom. So what they did was they set the whole thing up so that she was alone with the judges and all of the rest one in one room. And then they had like a live feed into another room where all the international press was gathered. But there was an 8-second delay for the sound, meaning that should she say something that they didn't want, they could just delete it or stop it on the way. And the international press was just like, this is a scandal. What the hell is going on? Why are they allowing her to be like this princess and get away with whatever she says? But she has been so unwilling to cooperate, and all the time being treated like, you know, everybody has just bent over to try and please her. But she has been behaving very, very strange. Then we have the autopsy, and please interfere, come in at any time, Alfred. But we have an autopsy of the Swedish Prime Minister. He died from one shot that passed straight through his body. So what can there be in the autopsy report that can be strange or something that they want to hide? But this is the official autopsy report, and it took us 8 years to get this report, and look at how it has been censored. It's like 8 pages. Really? Now, after 30 years, I managed to get hold of the original, but this is just unbelievable that anyone, any nation will accept something like this. And then they say, no, it's because of consideration for the family. There are no photos of the autopsy. There's nothing, except this protocol that took us 8 years to get hold of. And then it's like 50% blacked out. Also, his death certificate you have here. This was written during the night when he was killed. And it says here, Sven Olof Palme, Sven Olof Joachim Palme, and then the address and when he died and so on. But the address Storkyrkobrinken 31 does not exist. There are no 31 numbers on that street. It goes to 14 and then it stops. So, and it was well known by everyone that he was living in the old town. This is a city or street in the old town as well, but this is not at all the one where he lived. He lived at Västerlånggatan 34, and here we have Storkyrkobrinken 31. It's nowhere near. So the guy that made the autopsy, that, by the way, when he was a young man, he was part of the autopsy of Martin Luther King. Can you believe it? Very, very odd coincidence. I don't know anything except that. I just know in one interview he said he was part of doing the autopsy of Martin Luther King. So I think it's very interesting when you have, maybe there's like 5-10 major assassinations during this century, and he was part of 2 of the biggest ones. Anyway, he kept saying all the time, the real truth is in the autopsy protocol. The real truth is hidden there. So we look at that. I mean, I've been walking up and down these streets and trying to find out why on earth would he do a thing like that? What does that mean? And then if you put that address into Google Maps, guess where you come? It shows the royal castle. So what is going on here? And I believe that what might have happened, I'm speculating now, but just like with JFK, when his autopsy, or I mean, there were multiple autopsies done on the body of JFK, trying to alter the damages or the injuries so that it could be blamed on a lone shooter here. And so when they did the autopsy, I think there was 32 people in the room when JFK was being having this autopsy. And there were, I mean, this was the men in black. There were all kind of, I identified all of them, but there were high admirals, there were people, generals, there were all type of people in the room. And the doctors there were military doctors, so they were under order. They had to follow order. And they were also threatened by, you know, like a military court if they did not obey and do what they were supposed to do. And I believe possibly we have a similar situation here where this guy who did the autopsy, Milan Valverius was his name, that he was suddenly found himself in a situation where he was sitting in a room filled with weird people that he felt very strongly must have been part of this operation. And so I think that he wrote that address to point out, to scream silently out to people like myself, check it out, check it out. And the reason why he aimed at the castle, why he wrote that address, was to point at the power structure behind this assassination. That is my speculation. Here is Milan Valverius. He kept saying the real truth is in the autopsy protocol. And after he has gone out and said that in an interview, when he came to his, he was working as a coroner at this special hospital. And when he came there one day, all of his notes has been taken. They had cleaned out the whole area. He was charged with all kinds of things to discredit him. His career was destroyed. And then he committed suicide together with his wife. They're like a Romeo and Juliet suicide. They decided, let's kill each other, you know, let's commit suicide together. Or were they possibly suicided? I would strongly suggest that there is a big chance. When you look at these cases, there's so many people that are taken care of, and especially people with inside knowledge. In this case, the guy that did the autopsy. Do you want to do any comment, Alfred, or can I go on?
Well, there's one glaring question which keeps on coming up for me, but I didn't want to anticipate your findings, so you don't have to answer it here. And that is, what's the motive? You know, what was, if you go to JFK, there, people can spend a lot of time on the motive. You know, was it because Vietnam? Was it because of Russia? Was it because of Israel and nuclear bomb? Was it because of the ETs? There's all these motive questions. And so Olof Palme, what was the motive? So we're all watching this, and we're just going to wait for you to come up with the motive.
There is a reason, Alfred, why it's taken me 30 odd years to find out.
Right. So we're just going to, this is like a meal, which you can't hurry. So we're just watching, and you know, like I keep on questioning, well, what was Lisbeth's role? But we know that there's a point in the meal where you're going to serve her up too, and you're going to serve up Olof Palme, and you're going to say, this is why he was probably assassinated, and these were probably the people behind it, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves.
No, this is the key questions that you have to ask yourself. What is going on here? Why are somebody trying to hide their tracks? Who are they who have access to this material, you know, to all the evidence material? Who can manipulate the documents? Who can cut? Why are they doing it? And this is where, well, this is why it's taken so many years of my life to come to a conclusion. I believe that I found a conclusion. Many other people that are in this area, they're just shaking their head at me saying, oh, come on, he's just trying to get all the different leads to fit in together in one big mesh. But I tell you, I believe that once I'm come to the point where I'm going to show you what I believe happened, then everything will fall into place. Because up until then, it's a total mess. It's like it's pointing in all different directions and it doesn't make any sense. So, leading the investigation, we have my friend here, Gösta Söderström. He was the very first one that came to the site of the murder site here. You can see on the pavement here, you can see where the blood is. And Gösta Söderström, he was the highest officer that evening. He was the guy in charge of that area of Stockholm. And they were driving around. It was a very calm evening, you know, nothing was going on. It was a little bit cold. There were very few people out because most people were on winter holidays. And so not a lot was going on. It was dark. And when they were driving up a street not so far from here, suddenly a guy jumped out in front of the police car saying, there's been a murder, there's shooting over at Sveavägen. So Gösta Söderström then wrote down on a piece of paper that he always did when he was alerted, and then they drove around the corner. I mean, it took them less than a minute to get to the site of the assassination. And when he arrived, by which he always did, was like by routine, was to write down the time when they arrived. That's standard procedure. So he went out. He didn't recognize who was lying there. He did not recognize the woman that is Lisbeth. He did not recognize her at all. There were other people that had gathered around trying to save him, but they were being treated very strangely by his wife. You know, there was one young nurse that was trying to give him CPR and also mouth to mouth, I think it's called, and Lisbeth was pulling her away from Olof, you know, like stopping her from saving him, which she has found very strange. And also she was running around like a chicken without a head, almost hysterical. That's what people described, even though she herself said that she was calm, like super calm. Anyway, so he walked up to the body. He saw that it was the body of a dead person. He was lying on his back and there was blood all over his face. So he kneeled down by him, and then he pressed his finger against his eye, his retina, or not retina, but his eye, to see if there was any kind of reflexes. This is what he said, and I don't know if that's a normal way of identifying if somebody is alive or not, but he had more than 30 years in service, so that's what he did. And he said that person was dead as they come. So, and he still didn't recognize who it was. So he stood up and he started talking to the woman. And the woman then screams at him and says, can't you see who I am? I'm Lisbeth Palme, and that's my husband, Olof. And at that point, just as I said, he looked down, it's like, and then he sort of, wow, he had no idea. So of course it was a shocking thing, but he had like 30 years as a police officer, so he had seen anything from burnt babies and you name it. So he walked back to his car and called in and said, there's been a shooting here. Is it known who is the victim? And the person in the other end says, no. And he says, it's the Prime Minister. I repeat, it's the Prime Minister. So what he has been accused of afterwards is that he was in such a state of shock that he was wandering around like a zombie for between 6 to 10 minutes doing nothing because he was so shocked. Because we have a major problem we're going to come to before, and that is that some of the other police cars that arrived there, they arrived before the big alarm had gone out. So why did they come there if no alarm had been sent out? And there's a 6-minute gap here that shows that something absolutely massively wrong went down. And it was because of Gösta. They tried to force him to change his time and saying he arrived 6 minutes later to push, because then suddenly all the pieces would fit together. But he refused. He said, no way, I know I came at this time. And that was what destroyed his whole life. I mean, I've been sitting with him. He was like more than 6'3", a big guy, and to sit there with an older man with a fantastic career behind him that has been based on honesty and dignity and all of this, to sit with him crying in my arms because he's been standing up against this, that is heartbreaking, I tell you. But that is what happened. So uh, the the chief, what happened also was that instead, when the police found out that it was the prime minister that had been killed, instead of calling in all the big shots, you know, all the good guys that had many years of investigating murder cases, nothing happened. Nothing happened. They didn't call them. They didn't phone them. They didn't let them know. And so this guy, who is the chief of, his name is Tommy Lindström, he was the chief of the National Homicide Squad. And so you'd think a guy like that, when the prime minister is murdered, wouldn't he be someone you would call? But no, they did not. And so he's written a book. His My Life as a Cop, it's called. And in the book, he very arrogantly describes what happened that day, the morning after the murder. So Olof Palme was officially killed 11:21 p.m. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, Tommy Lindström, it was his birthday, he went out and picked up the newspaper outside his villa and saw Olof Palme shot. So he thought, oh, that's not good, and then went back to bed. That's what he writes in his book, because it was his birthday, and he knew that his kids had prepared a birthday surprise. You know, it was a bandy club, one of these, like an ice hockey stick, and so he didn't want to disappoint them. So he went back to bed and pretended that it was asleep, and then they came in, they sang "Happy Birthday to You." And then there was like a treasure hunt before he found this hockey stick. And then he went to work, and he arrived at 11 a.m. in the morning. Like 6 hours later, he arrived to his office. Does that sound reasonable to you? But it's in his own book, and that's when he arrived to his office. So 6 hours late there. Then there was some of the real veterans when it comes to these type of investigations. Like one of them, Arne Irvel, he found out, you know, at 7 o'clock in the morning, he was sitting having his morning coffee. He opens the newspaper, Olof Palme shot to death. And he's like, what? So he calls in, and they say, and he says, why didn't you wake me up? Why didn't you call me? And they said, well, we understood that this is going to be a long investigation, so we thought it would be better if you'd had a good night's sleep, and then you would come freshly, you know, refreshed and ready to work, and it would be a lot better. That's why we didn't call you. So he went into work like in a panic mode, went in there, and was then given the task to communicate with the media instead of looking into the assassination. And this is not only one, there's multiple of these people where these are the ones that should have been called in, but they were not. On the contrary, they were put and to do absolutely, you know, like unimportant stuff. And then instead, the key positions were held by people with no experience, like this guy, Hans Holmér, who was the first chief of police. So officially, he went up to a city called Borlänge. It is where the Vasa, there was a Swedish king in the 1500s that did like a ski race to alert the population. So this is, I believe it's, I can't remember, but it's something like 70 kilometers or something like that, like a marathon on skis, cross skis. And so officially he went up to Borlänge to take part of that competition, because that was the thing. And so he was not contacted either. And according to his book, In the morning, it was like 7 o'clock in the morning. He goes down to the reception to pick up some tea water. And then the woman in the reception says, have you heard that the prime minister has been murdered? And he's like, what? And she said, yeah, he's been murdered. So he calls into his office saying, what the hell? Why haven't you called me? And then he jumped into his car, which was a rental car. He's given 4 or 5 different variations of how he got from Borlänge to Stockholm. But that was also a long car ride, and he arrived more or less at the same time at 11 a.m. to his office at the same time as the chief of the National Homicide Squad arrived as well. And when some of my friends started questioning some of the things that he had been up to, because it didn't make any sense. There was all of these weird things that didn't match up. And so we pushed him. And after a while, he then gave a copy of the receipt from the hotel where he was in Borlänge, up where the ski contest was going to take place. But here you can see this is where he paid for the whole thing. But he checked out on March the 1st. But you can see the receipt is from the 28th of February. There's also other things, you know, he paid with a credit card. They put the wrong initials, EB. There was no one working there that night with the initials EB. And also you can see that it's the wrong date on the other receipt as well. So manipulation once again. Now, his private driver was a former paratrooper and like a bodyguard type. His name was Hans Dahlgren. And he, anyway, a few years after this crime, he stepped forward in TV3 in Sweden and said that he drove the chief of investigation past the murder site 7 minutes after the shots were fired. When he was officially up in the north of Sweden sleeping, he said, I drove him past that. And that he stepped forward and saying, I drove him and someone he called the ambassador, and they were going around in circles that evening around the time of the assassination. His name was Rolf Dahlgren, sorry about that. He was called Dallas, and then he ended up dead. He was found dead in his kitchen from alcohol injuries. They say that he had been a heavy drinker, but he didn't drink at all. And so very bizarre there as well. So quite early on, there were police officers that were stepping forward saying, you know, we have this gathering of Nazi police officers in the center of Stockholm. There's this police station called Norrmalms police station, and that was almost like a center, like a magnet for all right-wing police officers in the whole of Sweden. So it was a very, very, they were very brutal, many of these police officers. And they had like secret meetings in the old city where they had Nazi salutes and all kinds of stuff going on. And you have to understand, this is the police, what do you call it, decent district, or where it's the one that controls the government, it's the one that controls the castle, it's the center of the whole of Stockholm, also the Social Democrats headquarters. All of these things is under this specific police station, which is also the exact same police station that was very central in the alleged truck attack 2017. But here we have this gathering of these right-wing extremists. And after Olof Palme was murdered, they were cheering, you know, they were saluting with Nazi salutes. So they were making toast over they were calling each other and pouring up alcohol and toasting for the death of Olof Palme. Very, very brutal individuals. And one of the people that was a colleague to my friend, Gösta Söderström, if you remember the guy, the first police officer on site, he had a colleague called Gösta, sorry about that, Gösta Trysberg. And this man was also a very honest, decent guy, but he was the officer in charge for these right-wing police officers. And he was extremely worried about all of these Nazis in this police station. So a few years before the assassination of Olof Palme, he stepped forward saying, this is very dangerous. I mean, I don't have any control over them. They have secret meetings behind locked doors. They have all kinds of weapons. They have dogs that barks when you show a photo of the Swedish prime minister. It's out of my hand. I don't know what to do. So he put in reports to his superiors saying, we need to do something about it. And after he did that, his whole life was messed up. They took his gun from him. They took his license from him. He was put off duty, and he started becoming very paranoid, according to his wife, who said that he felt like he was being followed everywhere, and that the phone was tapped and so on. And then he was found dead. It was one morning. He was outside his villa. His wife had broken his leg, and her leg, and so he was just going to go out and pick up the newspaper, and then he didn't come back in. So she said, since she couldn't move, she called a friend saying, I don't know what happened to my husband. He hasn't come back in. So they took a taxi and drove over there, and they found him dead in the snow. He was lying on his back with the lower parts of the legs bent out to the sides, and he was stabbed 15 times, and then hit in the face with something hard. And this was ruled a suicide. I mean, it's absolutely, here's from the autopsy, and this is signed by the nationally, the number two highest guy when it comes to people who do autopsies, the coroner I'm talking about. And so I'm just going to demonstrate how easy it is to stab yourself 15 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So it's like you have to be very determined to be able to end your life like that. But it was signed off as a suicide. And this whole thing that he was hit in the face after he died, they say, well, they must have dropped his body at the coroner's, but there was no signs of that. So here's are some of these police officers, these right-wing police officers, and they went under the name of the baseball gang. The reason why they were called the baseball gang was that they had started what they called an anti-street violence group. And these people were dressed in civilian clothes with baseball bats and baseball caps. And what they did was they went around, they drove around in police vans in the inner city of Stockholm, and they just beat the crap out of drug addicts or, you know, whatever they considered low lives. And they had so many people signing complaints again. Like one of them had 177 complaints about violent behavior. That, you know, they even killed one guy in an interrogation. He was a drug addict, and they took him in for a hearing, and he did not come out alive. They say that he had. Well, when you look at the injuries to his body, the only way he could have, and that's what they say, was that he threw himself against the table, the edge of the table, crushing some of his inner organs, and then jumped on a bench and threw himself with the head first into a concrete floor. That's how he died. And when that happened, did they rush him to the hospital? No, they just threw him in the van, drove around for a little bit, and then more or less when he was dead, they drove him to the hospital, but it was too late. I mean, brutal, brutal people. And the guy who had started this anti-violence group, the baseball gang, was Hans Holmér, the guy that later became the first head of the investigation. So that they were his people, you know. And after he started doing the investigation, they also appeared as his bodyguards. But the people with this group that went under the name of the baseball gang, there were about 10 of them. And this night of the assassination, They are in all the key positions this evening. They were driving the ambulance this evening only. They were sitting in the where the police central was, you know, the center of communication for the police. That was one there. They were there receiving the calls in after the assassination, delaying. They were the first police cars, vans coming to the site. They were the people running after the assassin. All of them, all of these key positions. There were also one of them that was this evening only was in charge of all radio communication for that part of a major part of Stockholm. So all the key positions, boom, 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 this evening only were occupied by this little group under the control of Hans Holmér, the head of the investigation. So if you look at the map to the right, we have the X is where he was shot. We have the where they came from, the Grand Cinema. This is how they walked, and then they crossed the street, walked up, and he was shot. Now the killer then ran up the stairs, the black dotted line going to the right, and the first police van that came after my friend had arrived there, Gösta Söderström, while he was standing in interrogating the wife of the prime minister, the first police van pulled up. And this police van had, it was called 3230. This police van had nothing to do in that part of town because it belonged to the southern part of Stockholm. So what was it doing there? Because it was standing above, it was parked above the stairs where the killer disappeared, looking down at the site where he was shot. So when the shots were fired, it was up there. And then they, just a few seconds before the shots were fired, they say, they started driving towards the site. And then they heard the call, oh, there's a shooting there. So they drove very quickly and arrived to the location as the first outer sort of vehicle. They say that the reason why they were up there in the wrong district was because they wanted to park a car. This police officer, he normally goes under the name D in different documentaries, but he's a right-wing, very, very brutal police officer called Claes Djurfelt, who was part of the baseball gang. And he had this Volkswagen that was parked wrongly, they say. So the reason the van went up there was for him to find a better parking for his car. But what he did was he drove around the block and then parked it in the exact same location as it was before. If he even did anything with the car, I would say that was the official excuse for them to be up there when this whole thing happened. And then when this van arrived to the site of the murder, my friend Gösta Söderström said to them, okay, you guys, the killer went that way, go find him, chase him. And they were like, yeah, but we don't have body armor, he was just like, come on, get the hell out of here, find him, you know. So they started running, but witnesses said that they were running around laughing. It was like a class of children running after the killer. And here we have someone who's just killed the prime minister of this nation and who's armed with a lethal gun. So why did they run around like little kids? And one of them, this guy Claes Djurfelt, next to the stairs there is this escalator, and so he took the escalator, even though this armed killer is supposed to be somewhere on the other side on the top of this hill. So can you find a place that is worse for protection than going up this stair? Because if he suddenly appears at the top with a gun, you're dead. But here he was driving up there so calmly, just as if he knew that there would be no one there. You had this witness, which is from a parallel street. This is the street where the alleged terror attack with a truck attack happened in 2017. It is the exact locations of both the assassination and that terror attack. And there's three big things in Sweden. There was a suicide bomber. All of them are within spitting distance. I mean, it's there. It's the same backyard. It's the same players, it's the same location, and so on. Anyway, this woman was living up on the second floor of this building to the right. And just before the assassination happened, I mean, she had no idea that something was going down. She heard that there was, it sounded like radio communication outside her window down on the street. So she went out and she looked out the window and she saw there was this police car parked underneath, up on the pavement, with a police officer sitting with the door open on the driver's side with a microphone in his hand. And then he said, "Okay, over there." And then he jumped into the car, took off with screaming tires, and crossed over the corner. So he almost, like skid marks and stuff. And in the back of that car, she also noticed that the whole back seat was filled with some kind of technology with a lot of flashing lights and stuff. And she also saw the numbers, 3 numbers of this car. She saw 520 on the rear mirror. And that's where the numbers of Swedish police cars are located as well. So I would very much strongly suggest that this could very well be another chief of police car. It's called 1520. That was there this evening, where these people in that car also was very closely connected to the baseball gang. And some technical experts have said that the equipment in the back of that car could very well be amplifiers for the signal of the walkie-talkies, because there's so many high buildings in the center of the city, and this was 1986 where the technology was not as good as now. So they have suggested that that technology in this all of these blinking lights and so on was there to amplify the signals between the different people with walkie-talkies. Here we have the 2 people here that were driving in that car. And we also have one of the last witness that saw the shooter take off over the stairs. And that's the guy in the middle here, Olof. He was very afraid to follow him, but after a while he ran up the stairs, and that is where he met somebody who had seen the police or the shooter run down the street, the street that I showed you to start with. And so he was running after, not seeing the shooter anymore, but he was running down the street. And at that point, this car 1520 appeared with these 2, this police chief to the right, Christian Dalsgaard, and his driver, one of the baseball gang. And anyway, officially they say that they heard that there had been shooting. So what they did was, instead of going straight to the site where the shooting had taken place, they said, we went through the back streets so we might be able to sort of find him there if he was running away from the site. That was the whole idea. But when the witness here in the middle, when he was coming running down that exact street where the shooter disappeared, this police car came driving very slowly with the lights off and just passed him. Instead of, had they been there looking for the killer, and no one knew what he looked like, but it was a male, why didn't they stop this guy? And because it just passed on. So this guy in the middle, Olof, he was like, why are they not stopping? So he turned around and went back, and they stopped above the stairs, parked there, exactly where the van had just left a few minutes before, parked there, and he went up to them and said, listen, are you looking for the killer? And they said, yes. He said, I saw him, he was running that way. But instead of getting him in the car and turn around, and then he could sort of like help to identify that they would drive around these back streets and say, oh, there he is. They say, please go down to the site of the assassination and wait to be interrogated, which was, he did. He waited for a long time. In the end, nobody really questioned him, so he went home. And then he had to call the police afterwards saying, I saw this. And just like with all the other witnesses, so many people around it have been met with this negativity and reluctancy to do anything about it. They've been almost having to push themselves on the police even to be interrogated. Here's another guy from this baseball gang. His name was Olof, and he controlled the incoming emergency calls from people on location saying, there's been a shooting. And waited first to pick up the call, and then he directed the alert to very specific vehicles only, not to the whole. I mean, this should have been something that went out to all police districts in the whole of Sweden almost, but at least in the inner parts of Stockholm to start with, so that all the police cars could come to the place, block off the streets, and start looking for the killer. But this is exactly the opposite of what happened. Here's another guy, a very, very, very strange individual. He goes under the name of His name was Carl Gustav Östling, and he is sort of like a Swedish version of James Bond, I would say. He was a police officer. He was a very, very skilled police officer, very skilled with weapons. He was the guy actually that chose the weapon for the Swedish police in total, the type of weapon. He was the guy that picked it out. And he was the guy also that has been used many times as a fixer. And he is very, very central in all of these, this, what we're going to come to afterwards. Several of his colleagues after the assassination called in and said, you have to check out this guy. He could fit in perfectly. He hated Palme. He had access to these type of weapons. He had access to that type of ammunition. There were all of these photos of him and his friend doing Hitler salutes everywhere, you know, in front of the, in Berlin, and the lower picture down there is at the Hitler's eagle's nest. But no one looked into it. No one looked into it. And then a year or so later, there was a big scandal that erupted because in his apartment, they found loads and loads of weapons, including bazookas and including ammunition of the exact, I'm saying the exact and quite unusual type of ammunition that was used at the assassination, or at least the type of bullets that were found on the site. But he was just released. But nothing happened to him. And here is his friend, Ingvar Grundborg, who was a major. And just this evening, he was the chief, or up to this evening, he was the chief of all the radio communication for the western part of Stockholm. And then the day after the assassination, he just disappeared and then gave the job to his friend called Gustav Östling. So we have these key people in key positions that right after the assassinations just disappear or take away. Here is a picture of him from today. I mean, these people are doing great, not a problem. Their careers have gone really good. Here's Claes Hjulfeldt, the guy, baseball police, the guy that were part of, he was the guy that took the escalator and so on. And if you look at the picture to the right, in the building to the left, where the car is standing, on the first floor up there, the Carl Gustav Östling, the James Bond guy. I'm sorry about all of these names, but the James Bond person, Carl Gustav Östling, he had his an office there where he had a weapons company together with his friend Major Grundborg. And this is exactly where, just right outside this building, where the killer was seen the very last time. And then the building on the other side of the street, that's where Claes Hjulfeldt, the guy here with the beer, had his apartment. So exactly where these people were living and had their office is exactly where the killer disappeared. There were also two people that were recognized with walkie-talkies this evening. One of them, these two police officers, Thomas Pils to the left, Leif Tell to the right. And Thomas Pils was identified by witnesses as one of the people right before the assassination that was seen just 100 yards or so from the site where the shots were fired with a big walkie-talkie. And the guy to the right, his partner, Leif Tell, there was this guy that was described as the giant baby that was standing outside the cinema while Olof Palme and his wife were in there watching the movie. Because that is the perfect location when you think of it, when it comes to a hit. Because if they're in the cinema, you know they would be there, stuck there for at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours nowadays, depending on how long the film. But that gives the whole hit team a perfect position to move everything into action and position wherever they wanted. And so one person was placed outside the cinema, just standing out there, and quite a few witnesses saw this guy that they described as the giant baby outside, just standing, staring in, keeping an eye on something. They didn't understand why. I would very strongly suggest what we're talking about is Leif Tell, who, as you can see, looks a bit like, or in those days looked a bit like a giant baby. He was also seen following the couple when they started moving, when they left this whole thing started to walk. This is Leif Tell today. He's still a police officer. He still works there. He calls himself Leif, the tough Leif. Then we had a very, very, very strange shooting organization where key people in the baseball gang and the investigation and people that were identified by witnesses around the site just before the assassination were meeting in the same shooting organization here. They were meeting at weekends and so on. So you have, for instance, the guy, the top one to the left, Sonny Björk, he was the weapons expert of the Palme investigation. And the people that he's mingling with in this group are people that have been pointed out as taking part of the assassination. And some of them very high-ranking police officer or military officers. Some of them, the leading experts on false flag operations in Sweden and psychological operations. All of them in this tiny little group of people. So I find that highly unnerving. Here we have also the ambulance driver that picked up Olof Palme, who was very closely associated to the baseball gang. He was also the guy that was in charge when the alleged truck attack happened, where he was the first ambulance driver on location and the guy that organized the whole thing, including setting up like an emergency center. Instead of driving these people that got injured officially by the truck, there were 5 deaths officially and some people that were injured. They said, this is too much. We haven't got ambulances enough to drive these 5 people to this hospital. So we need to have this emergency center here. So they set up a center right by this, where this whole thing happened, where there was 150 people involved. I'm telling you, this is one of the key people which I always also have exposed as part of this operation. One of the key people, not key people in the Olof Palme assassination, but a key person, because he was the guy that drove the ambulance. He was the guy that was in charge of the body. And the thing is also, when the dead body of Olof Palme arrived to the hospital, he had an 11-centimeter long cut on the side of his chest that had been sewn together very, like very in a haste, just stitched up. This wound has never been officially looked at. I mean, you have a body that arrives to the hospital and somebody has cut it open and sewn it together like very hastily in an ambulance that was 6 minutes late to arrive. And this guy was the one driving it, or he was in there. And you can also hear in the radio communication from that evening, you can hear that he's the guy speaking to the nurses at the hospital, and he's saying, yes, it's Olof Palme that was shot, 2 shots in the chest, even though the official story is that he was shot from behind. And while the whole communication is ongoing, they're saying, we're coming in now with the body, but there are no sirens. You can't hear the sirens. There would have been the blue lights and the beep. You can't hear that in the background. Manipulation. So this guy that the whole of Sweden and the whole world has been looking for many, many years, there's this traditional image of him, and that is when he's standing with his arms crossed in front of his chest, standing waiting for this couple to arrive so that he could step forward and shoot him. But just about a minute or so before the murder, there were 2 Finnish women that were on their way home. They had been to the cinema and they were thinking, should we go for a drink or should we take the train home? So they decided, I don't really know what time it is. So they saw this guy who was standing there and recognized him as a Finnish guy that this woman had seen him at one of the gyms in the north of Stockholm. So she approached him. She knew she could remember that he had some kind of short both first and last name with the same letters. She couldn't really remember who he was, but she recognized him well enough to walk up to him and say in Finnish, "Excuse me, do you know what time it is?" And she says that he just looks absolutely terrified. And then while she was standing there, suddenly she heard from a walkie-talkie that he had under one of the arms, there was a voice in Finnish saying, "They're coming now, stand by." And then he said, "I've been recognized in Finnish. What should I do?" And the other voice just said, "Do what you're told to, just get on with it." So these two women thought, what is going on? You know, is this some kind of a drug deal that is about to go down or whatever? So they sort of turn away from that and go on very quickly on the other side of the street towards the subway station. And then her girlfriend says, "Did you see what he had under the other arm?" Because this woman had only seen the walkie-talkie, and she said no. And she said he had a big revolver. So he had a big gun in one hand and a walkie-talkie under the other. Now we managed to identify this guy. And can you believe it or not? He's a member of the government today. He's actually a high judge and a politician. His name is Antti Avsan, where he is, one of the things that he is very determined to do is fix the crime rates among young people, you know, to get the statistics down. But I would very much suggest that before you start accusing other people, maybe you should answer a few questions about what you were up to that evening right there. Because this is the guy who is standing there, Antti Avsan, with the gun and the revolver. I tell you, I do not believe that he was the shooter. I'm going to come back to that after, because I think that he was exchanged because he was recognized. So when the women left that place, there was a swap from a guy on the other side, because we had backup shooters, backup walkie-talkie, backup double getaway cars, and so on. So this is it. But this guy, Antti Avsan, has been central in other scandals as well. He was also part of the baseball gang, very brutal individual. And we had a very bizarre murder of a Swedish prostitute where she was found chopped up in small little pieces. And he was the very last person to be seen together with her. And she was found very close to where Olof Palme was, the autopsy and these things were done. I'm not saying that they're connected. I'm saying that the same people are involved in some of the major cases in Sweden. It's like the usual suspects almost that are repeated. And here we have another member, Per Julin. He was part of the baseball gang. He was later one of the bodyguards for the first head of the investigation, Hans Holmér, and he was later charged for murder of his girlfriend. So you see that very, very brutal, very brutal people. And another one of them, Stefan Svensson, who was also part of the baseball gang and was not on a street level this evening. I haven't been able to find out what he actually did, but it said that he was in charge on the inside, whatever that means. But he was later found and charged with the help of my friend Conny Andersson, the Apache tracker, who I believe was we were on your show a while ago. But anyway, he was charged for having raped children and also prostitutes, and there were drugs involved. And he had supplied also others with underage children for sexual abuse. So this is really, really as ugly as it can get. So the big question, Mr. Alfred Labramond Weber, am I a tinfoil hat, or Was it a lone nut, or was what we saw actually, or possibly, a coup d'etat, but in slow motion that took place that night? So I think, you know, I actually put one of your quotes, because at this point is where I'm saying, okay, now we're getting to the real stuff. So just to just show you some that have been backed up by some heavyweights around the world. I got Chip Tatum, a member of George Bush Sr.'s Ultra Secret Hit Team Pegasus. I got Professor Robert Harkavy from the Pentagon. I've got Jim Fetzer, PhD. I've got Chief FBI Consultant Alan J. Solarian, who's been backing me up, and there's many more who has backed me. So, Alfred, I would very much like to say that let's make this the end of part one, and then the next part we will go into what actually happened and this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Well, I just have to say that this is what they call a cliffhanger, because we're all wondering, I mean, not only who did it, but why they did it. This is like deep state, and why the deep state did it. And there's so many connections. There are so many connections here that I can see that even relate to today. Like you say, the truck bombing, like to false flags that are still going on. So we really relate. We're really waiting for the part two. You've done an excellent part one. And should we just wait till we're off the air and then coordinate the timing for part two?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
And I tell you, whatever you suspect, you have no idea what you're in for. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. So I'm very much looking forward to the next part. And in the meantime, please know, if you're interested, my book is Coup d'etat in Slow Motion, part 1 and 2, but it's actually one book, and you can find it on my website, lightonconspiracies.com. It is extremely detailed, with photos, top secret documents, you name it. I put a lot of effort into it. And Michael Moore's Swedish agent, he said, my God, this is a bomb of truth and nobody will ever publish it. And was he right? Yep, he was indeed. So in the end, I had to publish it myself, because it's just been shut down right, left, and center. I even got infiltrated, so I was super close of signing a deal that had turned really ugly, because I just by absolutely, I don't know what to call it, but angelic interference, then I was made aware of who I was about to sign this contract with. We can take that story another time. But this is recorded on the 22nd of July, and this is the day when the alleged mass shooting took place in Norway. And so I really want to think of all of these people that have been unknowingly become parts of these operations, where we're looking at collateral damage, where the numbers for them, the higher they are, the better it is. And it's so cold, so brutal, and so absolutely not okay. So that's why I devoted my life to expose these operations.
Well, you have always left us with a prayer, which I think is great. It brings us into that non-dualistic frame. And I wondered if you could leave us with a prayer
Sure.
here in part one, because I think there's something that we're going to learn profoundly about these times from this case. Ole.
Yep, I think so too. It goes like this. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May everyone, and especially the ones who hurt us, be filled with peace and joy, love and light. May the light of truth overcome all darkness, so victory to that light.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your profound work on this case and on all the cases that you've touched. And I'm just reaching out to our audience and ask for your support for Ole's work at lightonconspiracies.com. And until we meet again, shortly for part 2. Thank you, Olof.
Thank you so much, Alfred. And any kind of support financially, especially, is extremely appreciated. I'm a one-man band with a small little team that I'm paying, so I need to have some kind of income as well. So that would be amazing.